morning. As has become our standard, that is Don't Stand So Close to Me by the Police. Sting is the lead singer. That is a 1980 song, but it's still an oldie but a goldie. I'm coming to you from actually San Francisco today through the wonders of the internet. I'm out here for deposition, started right after we finished. It was very marked for me this morning when I came across the Golden Gate Bridge. There were not 25 cars on the entire Golden Gate Bridge. Driving through downtown San Francisco was dead, which is just so bizarre, but those are the days in which we live. Today's presentation is on business interruption and riots. We added riots to it at the last minute because riots have become a very important part of insurance claims going forward. Today's date is June 18th, 2020. It's 11 o'clock Eastern time and it's 8 a.m. Pacific time. What the information you'll be getting today, folks, is the most up-to-date information you can have, but it changes daily, just like riots. When we put this thing together, started 11 days ago putting it together, riots weren't even a major issue, but now they've become that. There's a Q&A box on the panel there. Be sure to use that. We try to get to all the questions at the end of the presentation. We never can, but we do answer those questions on our website. If you go to our website, it goes through all of the programs that are there. Today, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First is one that you know pretty well, Alicia Hopkins. Alisa is an attorney there at Holden Litigation. She's out of the Tulsa office. Alisa is very valuable. She's an MBA. She was also the law journal editor at Tulsa University, and she's an excellent writer. She wrote about a 100-page article that I've helped edit and she didn't need editing, but it's an excellent article. It's should be on our website too. Alisa, do we have that up yet on the website?
I believe it is up, yes.
Okay, good, good. Alisa knows more about COVID than anyone else I know in the country. And I say that unabashedly, and I know she's got over 300 hours in it easily. Is that fair, Alisa?
Absolutely, probably more.
I'll get 10 o'clock at night. I'll get calls from her at 10 o'clock at night at something new she's read and wants to talk about. She is really into this. Alisa, we appreciate it, and welcome to our program as always. I'd also like to introduce our guest speaker. It's Kurt Harms, H-A-R-M-S. Kurt is a certified public accountant, CPA. More importantly, he is a forensic accountant, which means it's his job to go through and weed through all the records and find out what belonged where and how it got there. I always kid Kurt because it sounds like it should be a program on TV, forensic accounting. But Kurt has a very interesting program. He does a lot of work involving Fortune 500 companies. And last time I talked to him, there was some riot stuff coming in too. Kurt, you there?
Hi, Steve. Hi, Alisa. Thanks for inviting me to the panel. My goal is to, as it is accounting, a lot of people start to nod off. I'll try to keep it interesting, keep it fun, keep it light, and add a lot of color to what's been going on in the accounting world. And Steve, that show would not even get a pilot nowadays with all the Netflix, but I'll sell it to them if they want to buy it.
There you go. There you go. Well, Kurt, we've been out 90 days. This is my 90-day beard. 91 days ago, no one dreamed the world we would live in now that we get, like I said, coming across the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was empty. So what I'm doing is encouraging you regarding your pilot for forensic accounting. You just never know what's coming around the corner. Kurt, welcome to the program. I'll turn this back over to Alisa and let her get it kicked off.
Thank you, Steve. I definitely do not think that anyone's going to be falling asleep today. I think this is one of the most interesting areas involving COVID-19 litigation going on right now. And it is constantly changing. We're constantly getting curveballs thrown at us whenever it comes to attempting to analyze the litigation regarding business interruption losses, especially now with thrown in, something new, which is the riots. So that being said, I just want to briefly, before Kurt and I really get into a discussion with and discuss some of his actual clients and what he's seeing right now, I want to talk about the two approaches that I and my firm have identified that the majority of states will likely use in order to calculate business interruption losses. So that being said, each state will choose one or the other of these approaches. And if you look historically, you could really give an indication which approach your state will use personally. I myself have looked at, I believe, all 50 states and kind of come to our conclusion which approach they would use. If that's something that you're interested in knowing or finding more information, feel free to contact me after the program and I can present you with that information. So the first approach that the court may use is something that I've kind of termed a post-catastrophe ignored approach. And just to very briefly summarize what this means that business losses would be calculated in a scenario as if COVID-19 never actually occurred. That's how they would calculate the business losses. There is another approach that several states could also take, and that we've seen historically, it is likely that they will. I'm calling this the post-catastrophe economy considered approach. And so this would be a situation where business losses are calculated as if, from the perspective that the COVID-19 breakout did happen, but the business remained open during the outbreak. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, who's going to give us a few examples, and we are going to talk about how these approaches would work with that and what we're seeing happen, and then also a little bit about the riots and how that is going to affect business losses and how the courts are going to be able to calculate it. Kurt?
Thanks, Alisa. As Alisa mentioned, we are currently working on multiple COVID claims submitted by Fortune 500 companies in which their carriers have identified and acknowledged a claim has been filed. However, reservation of rights has been sent to the policyholder pending interpretations of policies, which our firm does not do. We just measure the business income loss. And they are evaluating the value of the claim along with the law and the policy wording to determine if coverage is afforded. As you may know, if you're in the insurance industry, most viruses are excluded under policies. However, there are certain policies with coverage afforded for viruses with a certain dollar limit afforded to that amount. It is incumbent upon the insurance company to determine if coverages are afforded and whether or not there are policy limitations. Setting that all aside.
You mentioned the virus exclusions. Are you seeing kind of what we talked about on part one of our business interruption loss webinar, was that a lot of companies are going to be saying that COVID-19 claims do not count as business interruption because of virus exclusions. Are you seeing that?
Yes, we work closely with independent adjusters as well as the adjusters for the companies, the first line adjusters, general adjusters. A lot of claims have been denied as a result of the exclusion included in the policy for viruses. However, that, as you know, is not the end of the line. Just because the insurance company has denied a claim, the insured may choose the path of litigation to challenge the insurance company's decision that it's not covered under the policy. Without getting into that gray area, judges may find that the insured does have the opportunity to present its claim and could question whether or not the interpretation of the policy by the carrier was done correctly. So although those claims have been denied so far, it is not a closed door because the policyholder has that opportunity to challenge the coverage decision.
Absolutely. And, that was something we did talk about. We were going to start seeing an influx of this type of litigation. And it sounds like you are definitely experiencing that right now.
Yes. The carriers have been very clear in their intent to let the insured know that although there may not be coverage, they're not closing the door on the claim. They want to know the value associated with the pandemic that had taken place. And then as Steve mentioned earlier, we now have another factor to throw into the mix, and that is the riots that took place around the country, specifically in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where we have received assignments for businesses that had just reopened after COVID restrictions have been lifted. And we'll go into those a little bit later as well.
Absolutely.
I'll start with a youth group in which we received a claim. This is a national youth group that, of all things, was really started over in England. And an American traveling found himself lost in a city and asked for help. And he was addressed by a young man in a uniform. And the young man informed him he is part of a youth group that gives people aid when it's needed, and they do good deeds. This youth group in the United States has canceled all of its summer camps as a result of COVID-19 because it would be impossible to practice safe distancing. This is probably true of not only of this youth group, but of other summer camps around the country. And questions have arisen as to is there coverage for COVID-19 and how will we measure those losses? With this particular youth group, there are reservations made a year in advance. So the determination of the potential revenue loss is easy because typically this youth group fills up all the slots it has available for its campers to participate in that camping experience. Then the question becomes for us as accountants is, well, the business interruption loss is not based upon lost revenue, it's based upon lost income. And for those of you who are not accountants, net income is revenue less operating expenses that potentially are variable or fixed. I know based upon the early discussions with this group that the expenses saved are all the counselors that they would have hired during this period of time. And us as accountants work with what's called profit loss statements that provides the revenue and the expenses that a company incurs in order to generate a profit. So our measurement.
What you're describing sounds like it's a post-catastrophe ignored approach in terms of you're looking at losses sustained as if COVID-19 never occurred.
That's correct. And that typically is the way that the policies are written, Alisa. They will say it is the likely net income that would have been earned and those operating expenses that necessarily continue during the period of interruption. The reverse of that is revenue less saved expense, and it gets you to the same place. When we discuss calculations amongst the policyholders, they understand that top-down approach better than the bottom-up approach. Bottom-up is net income plus the continuing expenses, where the top-down approach is revenue less minus saved expenses. So this is normally where people start to get a little heavy in their eyes. They're hearing accounting jargon. They get a little sleepy. And what I do when I provide seminars is I give them a handout of what I'm talking about. And I encourage them to take that and put it on their nightstand. So if they have insomnia, you just pick that up, read it for about 2 minutes, you're guaranteed to fall asleep.
I like it.
It's better than any other sleep aids out there.
I like it.
Yeah. So let's finish up with our youth group that has high adventure camps throughout the United States. These cancellations were for and were followed under those state guidelines as to COVID-19 activities. At the time the cancellation was made, there were certain parameters set by each individual state as to whether or not those camps could continue. Their first and foremost concern is the safety of the youth attending those camps and those counselors. So once they decided that there was not a way to ensure that the safety of those campers could be determined, they decided to cancel the season under those state guidelines. So the question becomes, Well, was that a voluntarily closure, or were they forced by civil authority to close it, which you have brought up in your seminars, and correctly so. Did civil authority include the enactment of shutting down particular activity? One of the things about civil authority and insurance policies is the limitation in which that policy would provide coverage for the enactment of civil authority. I've seen policies that have 30 days, 60 days, and the most is 90 days. So these activities, when they were supposed to begin to when they were going to end, would fall within those 90-day period. So if the state determined that coverage was due to civil authority and the policy provided coverage for that, and they could prove that there was some sort of physical damage associated with the closure due to civil authority, then there may be coverage for that.
And that's when we get into, which we've discussed previously, a strong argument is regarding the physical damage element of these claims. Several policies require for civil authority order that the business shut down due to physical damage. And a lot of arguments are saying, obviously, COVID-19 is not causing that actual structural damage to the property. So that's an issue, obviously, that has come up.
And that's a great segue into the next industry in which we are involved in measuring a loss. The question of the policyholder was, yes, you shut down due to COVID requirements and concerns, but did you actually have COVID found within your manufacturing facilities?
Exactly.
And in order to do that, there had to be testing. Now, they did have employees test positive for COVID, but was the COVID found on surfaces within the manufacturing facility that could be interpreted as physical damage?
And
the answer is, I don't know.
Being made. We have seen that argument made. One is there's a lawsuit, a restaurant out of California for business interruption losses, and that is the argument that they are making, is that because COVID-19 is a virus that can land on surfaces and must be cleaned away from the physical premises, that would constitute physical damage. So it's very interesting that we are seeing the creative arguments for property damage coming out, and I'm sure we're going to see many more arguments as well for that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people become creative when they're trying to fit the terms of the policy into the losses in which they're suffering. Let's talk a little bit about that manufacturing facility. One of the things that is not as clear cut is how are they going to forecast that generation of revenue? Let's make believe that this is a company that makes air conditioning and heating furnaces. During this period of time, that manufacturing this facility was shut down. However, it's typical of any manufacturing to build certain levels of inventory to meet future sales demands. These types of industries also have brokers, for lack of a better term, or sales distribution centers in which they store this, either in a storefront, which eventually is sold to a customer, or it's in a distribution warehouse where upon ordering that finished product is delivered. So with COVID, they may have had a shutdown in production, but their sales could have continued as a result of customers needing air conditioners. Now, you may have we're in the state of Texas, you're in the state of Oklahoma. You cannot live here in the months of June through September without an air conditioner running properly. So you have COVID in effect. Unfortunate for me, I work out early in the morning and I have to endure the 15 commercials with air and heat companies trying to sell you a new product. And they all address the fact that they can come there without any contact. They wear masks, they use hand sanitizers, and they put little covers on their feet so they don't get your carpet dirty. So their attempts to make you feel good about using their services during COVID is that they're there still to service you. And in these two states, they were essential to businesses. So they were considered to continue, they were able to continue to operate under the state guidelines of your essential business because you're providing a service to people who need it so that their health is not in jeopardy.
So I find that so interesting.
question,
That's, you know, when we talk about those type of industries, people don't think about, there are some industries that actually did much better during COVID. They had a boom. You know, we talked about disinfectant industry, potentially air conditioning, people are at home more, that sort of thing. That would be a circumstance where some states consider it would be the post-catastrophe economy considered approach. So for air conditioning company did very well during the times of COVID, you would want the economy considered approach because you, the court would then consider the increase in business that you got during COVID for any time that you were actually shut down. So you could actually get more business losses as a result, as opposed to the historical, just looking historically, like COVID never happened previous with the economy ignored approach. So that's kind of an interesting example of how different industries really could want a different approach and for consideration of their business losses.
right? And you know, one of the essentials during this period of time was initially all restaurants were shut down for in-restaurant dining. Only takeout was available. So as a result of that, you had a lot of people saying, you know what, I'm just really still not comfortable going through a drive-through. And what happened was supermarket sales increased. But as a result of those sales increasing, they also realized that those frontline employees needed to be paid hazard pay. And they were given an additional, I believe it was $2 an hour at Tom Thumb, let's use for an example, during those periods of time in which COVID was present and people were sheltering in place. However, they needed to stock the shelves. They needed to keep operations running. One of the things that we would consider should a Tom Thumb or supermarket submit a claim, their claim potentially is for increased costs associated with COVID-19. That increase in pay to employees to stock those shelves, the increase in transportation costs to get locally grown products to the store if a normal supply line was disrupted. So there could be additional costs in which their profit margin wasn't as high.
Absolutely. And something that I have recently looked into that I know has not been discussed much. You see, like you said, a lot of these businesses are now using their own vehicles. They're doing deliveries when they didn't before. They're using it for business purposes. And a lot of these, the car auto insurance policies do not cover personal vehicles for business related activities. So that is something now that we are seeing potentially becoming an issue because so many businesses have gone to delivery type services because of COVID and the lockdowns. So it's just another puzzle piece in this entire, you know, COVID litigation puzzle that needs to be addressed and thought about.
Yes, I'm going to give you an example of a measurement for COVID that includes a hotel in which, as people here may know, a tornado went through Dallas October of 2019. And that tornado caused damage to a very influential area of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, went across a highway. And as a result, there were some hotels in the way of the tornado. Those hotels had broken glass. Some of them had some structural damage. So we have been measuring their business income loss since October of 19. And we rely upon what's called a competitive set. There's a thing called a STAR report that is put out by hotels in which you can compare your hotel to other hotels that are similar to yours. We use that tool to measure the occupancy that hotel would have enjoyed if it remained open. And the policy says you are to be indemnified for the likely net income that would have been earned had the loss not happened. Well, the loss was the tornado. And come March, Dallas had a shelter-in-place order. I think it was on the 15th. And at that point in time, hotel occupancies significantly dropped as other states joined the shelter-in-place. So it's incumbent upon us to determine what would have been the likely net income if the loss had not happened. Now, the physical damage was caused by a tornado in October. The likelihood of revenue in the months of March, April, and May are significantly lower than they would have been in 2019 because of COVID. So one might say, well, the insurance company can't have it both ways. You can't take a loss unrelated to the tornado and say that it affected your occupancy. So what we are doing currently is we're measuring the loss under both scenarios. We're measuring the loss based upon historical information from the prior year based upon seasonality. And now we're currently also measuring the loss based upon the effects of COVID and allowing the insurance company to make the determination of how that coverage should be applied.
That's very interesting. And along those lines, I think that it's very relevant right now. I've been getting so many phone calls from clients and just some companies that are wanting more information in terms of what's going on right now. Is the businesses are reopening, partially reopening in different states. Obviously, the riots that have been occurring presently have impacted those businesses in terms of their physical structure, like you said, kind of similar to tornado, the broken glass, the looting, everything of that nature that's going on now. I've gotten a lot of questions about how exactly that impacts business losses calculations. They're still, in the process of reopening, they're still sustaining business losses as a result of COVID. But then this extrinsic factor comes in and makes a huge impact. And, what do you do in that kind of circumstance? And it's something that I find very interesting because we have seen, and no one has really, I think, touched on this yet, but they will, after September 11th, after that occurred, quite a few insurance policies began writing in terrorism exclusions into their contracts, meaning that business interruption coverage would not apply for acts of terrorism. We have seen that our president has indicated that he does plan to label officially Antifa as a terrorist organization. And so from that perspective, I find it very interesting and can see kind of where this might be going in terms of insurance policies may not apply to some of the damage and the looting done during the riots. Kind of how do you think that would apply?
The policyholders are going to have to be careful to determine whether or not an organization was responsible for the damage done to a particular building. Certainly, some of these demonstrations have been organized by so-called terrorist organizations or potential terrorist organizations. Currently, all the claims that our office is working on have not been identified as a result of a terrorist activity or a group causing that physical damage. And I believe the reason that's happening is that the news is focused on anything related to terrorist or the Black Lives Matters movement to be careful of inciting more riots. And so far, there's been no denials of coverage associated with the Dallas activity that took place. It was somewhat centralized to different parts of the downtown area, Deep Ellum area. It's a lot of glass breakage, Fortunately, I don't know we have received any fires as a result of burning buildings. However, our Atlanta office has. Recently, unfortunately, a young man was killed leaving a scene in which the police had him detained. And it's unfortunate that it's happening all over the country, but each place has its own type of circumstances in which these organizations could be responsible. Certainly in Minneapolis, where they seem to be more organized and they continue to have physical damage in that part of the country. We are using the COVID period of time to measure the business income losses associated with businesses that were damaged and closed for repairs, mostly glass plate windows, which unfortunately, due to all of the damage that was done in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the tempered glass is now 30 days out of being delivered. So these businesses are being shut down for at least 30 days. In Dallas, you can have people inside your restaurant up to 25% of the capacity, and your drive-thrus can remain open. Most fast food restaurants track their drive-through sales separately from their dining rooms. So we're able to use that COVID-19 period of March through May to determine what were the potential sales they would have had in June and apply a 25% factor to previous in-restaurant dining experiences to calculate the revenue, which really brings us to an important part of the analysis of a business income loss, where we keep focusing on revenue. That is because without revenue, you can't pay your operating expenses. Right. However, as a result of these restrictions to the restaurants, and we'll just use the Wendy's for an example, they have a smaller staff as a result of only serving drive-through customers and dine-in customers. So their payroll expense goes down. So when we're measuring the loss, we have to take into consideration that not only did their revenue decrease, but their operating expenses decreased. That's very important also in our manufacturing facility. Those facilities were not union run. The agreement between the employer and the employee was that they would get 30 days worth of pay. However, they were shut down for 60 days. So in the measurement of the loss, we have a reduced amount of payroll expense to offset the loss of revenue. And
so I find that very interesting, kind of back to the Wendy's example. And I don't even know if anyone has figured out the scenario yet. We're talking about the Wendy's, say they have significant restrictions, like you said, maybe to drive-through only due to COVID. And it, due to the unfortunate circumstances that occurred in Atlanta, the facility was burned. And as a result, they had to shut down for a period of time during this COVID restriction period and reopened. And, they're still under restrictions. How would that gap of time from the riot and the burning, how would that apply and affect their COVID-19 related business interruption claim?
That specific example is actually a little bit easier to calculate than those restaurants that can remain partially open. Right. That one restaurant that everybody probably saw in the news, which is where the unfortunate killing of that young man happened, resulted in that business being burned down. In my experience in measuring losses associated with fast food companies, there comes a period of time in which the damage results in a complete scraping of the slab, and it goes back with the current restaurant type that they're promoting around the country. This is typical of, we'll call them the major fast food restaurants, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Burger King, Wendy's. We'll throw Raising Cane's in there. Shout out to Raising Cane's. They are always improving on their look. Their goal is to keep it fresh and new. And that's new menu items. It's changing the look of the restaurant. That Wendy's restaurant measurement would be based upon probably another franchised Wendy's in that demographic area that a forensic accountant could look at. Most of these restaurants are franchise owned, and the franchisee owns typically more than just one. And they keep them in geographical areas so that if there is a need to move a manager from one location to another, they can do so. If they need to move food from one location to another to take care of increased demand or decreased demand, they can do that as well. But that is going to be a measurement of a complete shutdown, probably for at least a 6-month period of time.
So just, you know, not in this hypothetical, but another one, say the police were able to determine that the destruction, they deemed it was caused by Antifa, and Antifa is officially labeled a terrorist organization. There is a terrorist exclusion within the policy. Obviously, that would make things much more complicated for you, I would assume, correct?
It would. Most likely what would happen is that assignment would stop at the adjuster's desk. It would be deemed not covered due to a terrorist activity. However, if there is pushback from the owner of the business, they may make a recommendation to determine the value of the damages and determine whether or not those damages are worth paying or litigating over.
Right. And right now I'm really thinking about some of the businesses in Seattle that are within that 6-block radius of, I guess it's called Chad's. It's the zone that has kind of been taken over, that are, they're either not open, or obviously they have been greatly restricted. Not by, I guess, the group Antifa, but just kind of thinking about those circumstances, if they were to occur across the country, the potential it could have relating to these claims, I think it could turn into something even much more complicated, if you can imagine, than what we already have related to COVID.
Yeah, I want to try to get in one more personal type of COVID discussion. If any of you out there listening are golf fans, you may recognize my last name. My brother is Kenny Harms. He's the president of the Caddies Association for the PGA. Currently, he's Kevin Na's caddy. Last year, Kevin won the Colonial Golf Tournament and presented my brother as part of his payment a 1964 Challenger. It is the Schwab Cup Challenge. Thus, they were presented with the first car, being that Kevin won on the Schwab Cup Challenge, which took over the Colonial Golf Club Invitational Golf Tournament. You may know that just this past weekend, the Colonial Golf Course hosted the Schwab Cup Invitational. There was supposed to be the second of cars presented to the winner, but due to COVID, 2 things happened. One, the car didn't get done on time, is what I've heard. And secondly, there was supposed to be a parade in which my brother and Kevin were going to drive the second car into the tournament to be presented to the winner. If any of you watched that tournament, I'm going to give you a couple of facts you may have or may not have seen. One, there was no shaking hands after the round, no fist pumps, no elbow rubs. The PGA has enacted that there will be social distancing during the whole tournament. Mm-hmm. After the pin was removed from a hole and put back in, it was the requirement of the caddy to carry Clorox wipes. Only one caddy got to hold the pin versus handing it to different caddies as they typically would do. Wow. That was to reduce the amount of touching of the pin, and then the caddy who placed the pin back in had to wipe it down with a Clorox wipe. Prior to the tournament, the first practice day was on a Monday. Every golfer, every caddy, every tour official, and every grounds person who was going to be in attendance was tested for COVID. They had a 24-hour tournament. Anybody who tested positive would not be able to participate in the tournament. They were also under lockdown, thus there was no pro-am, there was no fanfare, there was no fans attending, but it was still pleasant to watch golf on a Sunday morning and fall asleep on the couch.
I guess everybody's tired of the reruns of all the big games and all the big sports. So it's everybody gets to watch that. Very, very interesting side note, Alisa, while you and Kurt were talking, I got a call from one of the big 5 carriers that is listening and wants us to make a presentation to them on underwriting. Not underwriting they've done, but underwriting now based on all of this, what do we do going forward? I mean, there's just movement in the market, having to look down the road as to what's happening. It's a interesting time.
Absolutely.
Let's go to a couple of questions, and then I'll end up. This is, I think, for Kurt. Is it reasonable to indemnify a policy owner for their normal operating expenses?
Yes, to the extent that they have lost revenue, you would indemnify them for the operating expenses that they could not cover as a result of reduced revenue. So a great example is in our drive-thrus, if they are operating at 50% revenue and they continue to pay all of their employees to be at the restaurant, then 50% of that cost associated with the payroll expense would be indemnified.
Thank you, Kurt. Alisa, what is the status of the federal legislation to require insurance coverage for COVID-19?
Okay, sure. So I'm sure people have heard about this a little bit. It is still very in the early stages. There are 2 proposals in the House of Representatives regarding business interruption coverage. Neither have left the committee phase yet. One is referred to as the title of Business Interruption Coverage Act of 2020. The idea behind that is it would potentially void exclusions that cover pandemics or government shutdowns. So it's almost like a retroactive effect, or depending on how the final version of it comes out, it could just apply going forward. The other one is referred to as it's the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act, I believe. And that would create a reinsurance fund basically to try to encourage insurance companies to pay COVID-19 related losses. Like I said, right now, they're still in the committee phase. There's no indication exactly on what the final draft of these bills would look like, or if or when they would actually become law. Oh, I think Steve's muted. I think we lost Steve. There you are, you're back. Is there another question?
I muted myself because we have less popping if we have less.
Oh, sure.
Kurt, quick one for the final question, but I think this is a question that came in early, and I know you dealt with it in part, but I want to make sure, so if you got a couple of sentences you can give us here. What if business did not have a loss of revenue? Can it still have a business income loss?
Yes, it can. What could happen is, although they may be able to take care of their customers and generate the same revenue, it could come at an increased cost associated with, one, getting product expedited to the end user. And the reason I bring that up is a lot of places may have run out of certain parts that are needed. The only way to get those parts is to have it expedited freight-wise to the facility that needs that part. So they could have an increased cost of freight. Another is, we touched a little bit about increased labor costs, paying hazard pay for people to show up at work when they're concerned about their safety. Also, some of the things that may have happened just more recently is, once that inventory level starts to be depleted, prices go up. And if you can show that those prices went up as a result of no fault of their own, there's a potential that that also reduces their net income. So yes, they can.
Thanks, Kurt. And I'd like to thank both Alisa and Kurt for the presentation today. Kurt, you were absolutely wrong in the beginning that it would be boring listening about, and maybe that's Alisa and I's weakness too, that, you know, these things, they're just intertwined in our cases and there's no easy answer. If there's coverage, you know, then it's going to get real nitty gritty and everybody is out there claiming everything they can claim. No, it's very interesting. I wish we had more time to go. We'll probably have you back later in the fall because this will more develop and we can talk about that a little more. Before we finish, I wanted to go to, thank you, Alisa. Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to do.
Yes, sir. Before we finish, I'd like to go check out our Holden Institute page to see what's going on out in the world. Number one actually dealt with our subject matter today. Southern District of New York ruled that closures due to COVID-19 are not actual property damage and therefore not covered under business interruption coverage. Interesting for the Southern District ruling. Those things will be going on through the courts. I'm sure we'll end up in the state Supreme Courts and the United States Supreme Court. Beijing shuts down schools 1 week after opening because things went into outbreak. Folks, I think this is what we're going to see. I call it fits and starts, fits and starts. Every time we try to open up, if we're not careful, then we get the breaks. Florida hitting record number of new cases daily, 2,783 on Tuesday. The governor insists it's not related to reopening and states that Florida will not shut down. That's kind of the give take in this country that we're going on now, and I'll talk about that in just a minute because I have an interesting chart, but not yet. Number 4 in the Alisa's town there, Tulsa, Trump plans to hold his 20,000 person rally in Tulsa, despite COVID-19 cases nearly tripling in Tulsa County over the last week. I have seen the reports from Tulsa, and the health department is asking that gathering like that not be done. Fauci said he wouldn't attend such a gathering. We just have to be careful of our messaging, folks. What we're telling the public is good, that is capable of doing what's not. That's why I want to go to the U.S. surpasses Western Europe for COVID-19 cases in the coming weeks. I want you to look at this chart. This was all out of the Washington Post, I believe. The blue line is how Europe went with COVID. They were very low in February, of course. By April 1, they were just up there, 3K deaths a day. Then they made a steep decline. We didn't get as high. We're the red line. We didn't get as high. And now we're still up about, you know, the 800 a day. Why is Europe, who got into it earlier, and because of Italy had it much worse, why are they now almost baseline? This article, whether you agree with it or not, said they think it has a lot to do with inconsistent messaging in the United States. What's good, what's not. A lot of the states that didn't have early problems said, no, we know how to handle this. This is not a problem. Well, that would be my home state of Texas. Now they're having the problems. Florida, the problems. Oklahoma, the problems. Until we get consistent messaging and do it the same like Europe is doing, we're going to have trouble whipping this thing, and we'll go into the what I'm predicting will be what I call the double bounce, and that will be very hard on our country. We were very upstanding citizens, really fighting through the first time. When we go through it again, I expect a lot more problems than the first time. Let's hope I'm wrong. Folks, I appreciate you attending. We will answer those questions that you had on our website. If you have other questions, if you have certain presentations that you want to see, let us know. We're putting these things together regularly, routinely. We're looking into construction defect stuff and how that may be affected to COVID, that sort of thing. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, again, thanks, Alisa. Thanks, Kurt. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.